YouTube, what is good? It's your man Ribs from Doing Film Things. So today we're going to talk about Fomapan 400. This is a roll of film that I've heard a lot about and hadn't been shooting at all basically until a bit recently. So decided to kind of do a bit of an in-depth review here, do a bunch of images, kind of see how the film performed end to end, and then of course tell you my thoughts. If you don't know who Foma is a film producer in the Czech Republic that's been around for a long time. They actually produce all kinds of different things when it comes to film photography. They obviously make film, they make photographic paper for Darkroom, they make chemicals for the Darkroom, and they even have some medical applications when it comes to film, such as X-ray film, for example. So they've been around for a really long time and really know what's going on when it comes to black and white film, and of course those other kind of external applications. So I was very excited to check this film out. Let's go ahead and look at some photos first, and then we can kind of jump in and talk about what's going on. So I gave that film a bit of an application across different types of photography. Of course, there was some street stuff, there's a little bit of portrait work, and just kind of some general whatever. And overall, I really like this film. I think it performs very nicely, and it's got a very interesting look in and of itself. Before we jump into more specifics, let me show you some prints here. So for example, this is a portrait that I printed here, and it looks as good as any other black and white film. Sometimes it's tough when you're kind of just looking at things at a distance, but you can really get a sense for whether you kind of enjoy the film or not. And I don't mind. I really like how this film performs. Here's another one. Oops, I just knocked over some film. Here's another one. This is not a portrait. This is more of a kind of like a lifestyle shot, whatever you want to call it. And again, very interesting. This film, or this particular image, was actually very overexposed, and I managed to bring it back quite a bit on this side right here, just with some burning in the darkroom. So kind of usual process here. The film basically performs exactly as you would expect it to, just like any other black and white film. So let's talk about specifics. I think the first thing I want to talk about with Fomapan is about contrast. This film has a very nice kind of contrast that comes right out of the box. I think the shadows contribute to that a lot because the shadows tend to be a bit darker than usual. I think the shadows for this particular film really want extra light. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's not like you're going to get underexposed nasty shadows. It's more about the shadows themselves just are a bit richer when it comes to the black tone. It just gets deeper than a lot of the other images I've seen. And we'll see that a bit when we look at the exposure test in a second. The other thing I'm gonna talk about is grain. I think grain is one of the most kind of key features that this film showcases. It has a very apparent kind of pointy dot grain, and it's very visible when you look at your scans and also your images. Just looking at this image here, you can see the grain, there's no question about it. This is definitely a higher speed film, and therefore you'll see the grain. I don't think it's a problem, but it's definitely a distinct feature, and I personally enjoy it. I think that adds to the character that this film gives you, but this is definitely not one of those like super clean kind of like pro style films where you really get as much of a smooth blank canvas as possible when it comes to grain and other things. So just keep that in mind with Foma. I think the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to kind of the visual characteristics of the film is what I'll call blooming, and I think that's a term that I've heard used elsewhere for other things, but the highlights for this film really do bloom, especially when you have a really strong highlight. You get this like really kind of like shiny, creamy, halo-y effect happening. It's not haloing the way you would see with like Cinestill, for example, when there's no remjet. It's definitely not that aggressive or that shape. But for this, it's kind of just like very brilliant. And it's actually kind of visible here. As I told you earlier, this image, this particular side of it was very overexposed. And I brought that back with burning. I got enough details back, but if you look at his hands and the white part of that record, in there you'll see that it's very kind of like halo-y. It's almost angelic, and I think for certain application it looks really nice. I actually saw a photo on Instagram recently. I don't remember exactly whose it was, so I can't find it now, but the point is it was an interior shot of a train station, and the light coming through the windows was shot using one of these films, and that's where you really just saw those highlights bloom, and I thought it looked amazing there. So I think for backlit images or images where the lights kind of play a very particular role in terms of the shape or like where they're coming from, this blooming would be really nice. And it's not something that's as obvious in other films. I haven't really noticed this kind of effect in other black and white films. So, I think Foma has kind of something particular going on here. Hey, quick interruption. So I just want to let you know that you should go check out my podcast. It's called the New Classic Film Photography Podcast. In that podcast, I interview photographers from all walks of life from a diverse point of view. And we've got people doing all kinds of interesting, cool things. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. So go ahead and check it out. And make sure to follow us on Instagram as well, @NewClassicFilm. Thanks. Okay, so one of the things everybody talks about with regards to Foma 400 is that perhaps it's not technically a 400 speed film and it should actually be a 200 speed film. So I decided to do an exposure test and kind of see how I felt about that comment. And ultimately, I think there definitely is a difference when you look at how it performs rated at 400 versus how it performs rated at 200. And this is kind of obvious because, you know, that one stop of extra light from the base exposure probably will make a difference in your shadows. But I don't think that this is a problem. I think it's actually interesting. You know, you can flex this film and shoot it however you'd like, especially if you want to shoot more wide open with your lens and therefore you need the lower ISO. But I think it just produces a bit of a different look. The 400 rating gives you much more of a contrastier image overall, whereas the 200 rating brings up those shadows a bit more without really doing anything to the highlights. So I think it's a matter of personal preference. This film definitely can work as a 400 film. And we have a couple of examples here. You see first here the building. I think here is much more obvious given that there's some hard lines and it gives you something very clear to look at. And again, the shadows themselves just kind of are brought up just a bit. In this other example, we're looking here at trees with strong sunlight coming through the trees. And I think you see the same thing here. The tree on the left, especially on the ground, that's where you really notice the difference between the 200 and the 400. I think both images look fine. And if you showed me one of them without showing me the other, I'd probably be like, yeah, that looks fine. That looks completely properly exposed for either one. So I think when you have the comparison, you know, you kind of can double down and really make a big deal out of that extra kind of light in the shadows. But each image on its own, I think, is exposed properly and looks good. To me, it doesn't look like it's missing anything, whether it's underexposed or overexposed. So again, your choice, shoot it at 200 if you like, or keep it at 400, but it definitely performs properly at 400. I think one of the last things to mention about this film that's quite important is the price. So that's actually, I think, one of the reasons why people go to this film a lot. And it's because the price is good. It's probably one of the cheapest films out there when you compare it to basically like the typical big sellers, like anything coming from Ilford or like T-Max from Kodak, those kind of things. So you're definitely paying for less. And I don't think you're getting less quality because you're paying less. You're definitely getting a different look. And would I consider this to be kind of a pro style film? Probably not, because I think with pro style films, typically that implies as fine grained as possible, you know, as much of a flat image as you can get, like richness, detail, that kind of stuff. And this film has more of a look right out of the box. So I think, you know, it's not really an apples to apples comparison there. But nonetheless, despite the film being so cheap, it's a great product. And I definitely think that more people should look at this as an alternative, especially if you're looking to bulk roll. You can buy a bulk roll of Foma 400 or any of the other Foma films for a fantastic price. And that gives you a lot of film to work with for not as much money. So if you're looking to save money and still, you know, get film that you think is capable, I think this is a really good option, especially if you're going to bulk roll. All right, so tell me in the comments, what's your experience with Foma 400? I've been shooting it a lot, obviously, like I just told you in this video, and I really do like it. So I'm curious, do you enjoy it? Do you find that the rating makes a difference? Do you sometimes pick this over some of the more expensive films? Let me know in the comments. All right, that's what I got for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, of course. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and subscribe. All right, y'all, till the next video. I'm out.